All right, everybody, this is going to be the lecture for Chapter 2. We're going to do this one a little bit different from uh, how I often do or usually do these video lectures, in that this one I found a really good source from the United Nations of data, of lots of charts and graphs, to help us get a sense of the global situation um, with respect to drugs. And so that's what Chapter 2 is about. Um, but this data is sort of more comprehensive and frankly more updated than the textbook. And so now I'm not going to be focusing on the textbook, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be focusing on the textbook, because you will be, as usual, tested on material from the textbook, in particular as you're going through studying, trying to zoom in on the most important items. Key terms are always a great thing to study because I like to test those, because there are things I can tell you, go study this, and so you'll know for sure that you need to know these key terms because they're likely to be tested on the next quiz. And so, in anything from the chapter where it seems to be big, not some specific little technical thing, but big picture stuff, that's what I tend to zero in on, things that will give us a sense of the big picture. So we'll be looking for those things in Chapter 2. But, you definitely want to pay close attention and help me walk you through these graphs and tables and charts, because that's one of the challenges of being a criminology student, is to learn to master the art of interpreting graphs and charts, which a lot of times these are things that you have to be able to understand to kind of, again, get a picture of what's going on. So this is going to be a good exercise in myself walking you through interpretation of these graphs, some of them that are a little bit hard to figure out what's going on. All right, so let's start with this first one, and we'll move through them one at a time. Here we see the global number of people who use drugs and people with drug use disorders. So we're looking at two levels: just using drugs, uh, period, and those who have drug use disorders. And these are estimates for the entire globe. So we're talking, this is in contrast to Chapter 1, where a lot of times in criminology we focus on the United States because we've got plenty of problems here. But indeed, this drug problem is global, and there's hardly a place, a corner of the globe that it has not reached. And so it's also important to get the global perspective as well as a more local or national perspective. Um, we can see here, though, so the uh, I'm not good with colors, but like this would that be like a magenta or something? I don't know I'm not good at colors, but that color is represents the number of people using drugs, and then the white bar is the people with drug disorders. And you can see, first of all, that the number of people who use is much higher than those who have a disorder, which, as you would expect, because what happens is you have a certain population of people who will use drugs, and then a certain fraction of those who get hung up on those drugs and end up developing a dependency, an addiction, a disorder. So you can see that that's the case clearly on this global scale. And you can see that there's three sets of bars here, vertical bars, that goes from the oldest one being 2011 on the left-hand side, all the way to 2021, more recently on the right-hand side. And so what do we want to take away from this graph? Well, we can see, first of all, that this y-axis tells you the hundreds of millions of people who are using or who have a disorder. And so you can see in 2011, we're shy of 250 million people around the globe using drugs. Maybe like about, yes, a little bit of an estimate here, 240 million, which is, the United States has 330 total million people. And so it's not quite the size of the United States if you were to take all the people using drugs and put them together. But it's the size of a very large country. And now for those who have a drug disorder, that would be more like, what is that, about 25 million? 25 million. So clearly not as big, but still a problem when you're talking about multiple millions of people who are addicted to drugs. Now, if we move that, but this is the old numbers. Let's move up to 2016. You can see increases in both the use of drugs. Now we're up over, we're probably about, 275 million. It's gone up in using drugs. And it's also gone up a little. It's not quite as easy to tell how much, maybe 10,000 people, additional people who are have drug use disorders. And then finally, up to the most current data that we have, closest we can get to current, and we know we're always behind on data, we see again increases up to about roughly 300 million people using, and about 40 plus million people with drug use disorders. So what are the big takeaways from a graph like this? And I want to help you learn how to read a graph appropriately. There's usually a lot going on in a graph. You need to pull away the big story. The big story, I say, is maybe two parts. There's a lot of people using. Maybe it's more than two parts. Maybe it's three parts. A lot of people using. It's going up, and the drug use disorder people, that number is going up, and it's a fraction of, maybe like 10%, very, very roughly speaking, maybe 10% of those who use end up at any given time, at any particular time, any one of these years, it's like a slice in time, roughly 10% ending up with a drug use disorder. Those are the big takeaways from that graph. Now let's move to the next one. Users of selected drugs, drug groups by sex. So what you have here is you have this, again, this sort of, whatever color this is, dark pink color. This represents men, and the white represents women. And then we see the various different types of drugs. And so you're seeing the men in larger, because in all of these cases, with one going from left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of drugs. In each case, the majority of users are male. And this is a general pattern, not universal. It's not 100% the case, but most often around the world, more men are using a drug than women. The majority of the users, another way to put it, majority of the users are men, minority are women. So in the case of opiates, a serious drug, it's 75% men, 25% women. Cocaine, also serious drug, a big gap, 73 versus 27%. Cannabis, less serious, marijuana, but still a big gap, 70-30. Ecstasy, 62% versus 38. Amphetamines, drugs that that speed you up. Meth, for example, meth is being a very serious drug, a little closer to half and half, but again, men still majority at 55%. Same thing with the non-medical use of pharmaceutical opioids. So here we're talking about the abuse of drugs that are coming from the pharmacy. Still majority male. Closer, but still majority male. So takeaway from this, I think you want to look for clear patterns, big patterns. And here I think the story is that regardless of the drug that you're looking at, that it tends to be predominantly a majority male users compared to female users. And that's most true of opiates over here at 75%. Close with cocaine. That's what I take away from that. Now let's move on to this next one. So here you got an example of a graph. It's got a lot going on. It could be confusing and difficult to figure it out. Always helps to read the title slowly, figure out, because that usually cues you to what it's about. Primary drug distribution of people in drug treatment by region at the global level. The year is 2021. See, this distribution is confusing. What they mean is they're talking about if you're in drug treatment, someplace around the world, what are you in for? How many people are in for marijuana? How many in for amphetamines? How many people are in for opioids, etc. So these graph bars here that are horizontal, here where this tells you that for Australia and New Zealand, that the green is cannabis, marijuana, and so that and the light blue amphetamine type stimulants. So stimulants and marijuana are what most people are in treatment for in Australia and New Zealand. Less percent for these other things. Opioids, smaller, and then sedatives, the pain tranquilizers, so not using pharmaceutical drugs appropriately that are sedatives or tranquilizers. Then you have things like solvents and inhalants, other newly developed psychoactive substances that are fairly new on the market, hallucinogens, other drugs. Those are generally less commonly treated. They're less commonly in treatment for those things. They're not the major things here for Australia and New Zealand. And you'll see that there's a tendency, not perfect, but there's a tendency for those same kind of patterns to hold in other countries too, but again with lots of exceptions. Depends what you're talking about. So if we're talking about Europe, we see, let's keep it simple, because when there's a lot of data here, there's a lot of stuff you just want to get the big patterns. So here we're talking about different parts of Europe. Big story there is opioids. See, we're seeing a lot. That's this color again. This dark region here this is saying that most people in Europe are getting treatment for opioids. So that's a serious problem, more so than in Australia. In Europe, opioids big. Now, here we've got different parts of Asia, South Asia, etc. We don't need to cover all of those. Asia. Same story here. Opioids, biggest part of the line here of the bar. Less so, but here you can see in East and Southeast Asia, you can see that amphetamines is a big one. So that's kind of an exception there that's big, or it's a little, Australia's big there too. But then you can see in both Europe and in Asia that marijuana is one of the players, but not as big as you see in some other places. It's a player, but it's marijuana, but not number one. Overall story then for Asia, opioids, and Europe. Okay, if we move over to the Americas, there you see marijuana tends to have a fairly big place, especially in the Caribbean, Central America. Oh, and by the way, another takeaway, if you're very familiar with drugs, is another surprise is that these green areas are large. These green bars are large, especially in some places. And some people will make the mistake of thinking that, well, marijuana is not something that you ever end up in drug treatment for. It's not, people think it's sort of not addictive. It's not problematic. There's not, problem use associated with it. But the fact of the matter is that you can see it's substantial. It is a drug with a lot of problematic use with issues that land people in drug treatment. And you can see that if we skip down to different segments of Africa, that's true in Africa too. As I said, it's true in America. The Americas, I should say, and you can even see here North America, where we're talking about United States, Canada, that it's not as big, but marijuana is part of the story. You can see North America, which of course is home and surrounding the United States. We can see that opioids number one, amphetamines and marijuana similar. There are other things smaller. So, and you can see overall for the whole world, opioids overall is big with some exceptions. You can see here in Central America and Caribbean that you get, looks like that hallucinogens is a problem. And in South America here, you got some sort of other drugs as well. But those are more the exceptions. You know what I mean? The big picture, if I was to walk away with a big picture, I would say opioids and marijuana. Surprisingly, marijuana are big elements of the story here. We're looking at 15 minutes in. Let's stop here. We'll continue on in part 2.